Hi, so in this lecture we are going to be looking at the e-commerce platform called Oscar. Some things that I want to discuss with regarding to Oscar is first how to set up Oscar. I'm going to walk you through this because I know that this can be a bit of a pain. Obviously, if you are using a different operating system, then you'll need to use that operating system's equivalent with regards to package management and installing external libraries. As far as I know, Django and Oscar doesn't have anything that is different to the way that we've currently been working. And if you have successfully managed to install Python and you've been following along with the rest of our projects, you should have no problem following along here. So let's click on the Django Oscar link. And then the best place to go from here would be the documentation, obviously, if we want to set up a new project. So let's go into documentation. And then I want to look at the latest version of the documentation. Yeah, let's go with latest. And then here we've got all of our Oscar documentation. So what we want to do is we want to build our own shop. So you will go ahead and click on build your own shop. And then it will give you quite a comprehensive list of how to set up Oscar. Now, Oscar inherently is not just a plugin. It is what you would call middleware, and you'll notice that there are middleware settings in this. And what middleware does within the Django context is instead of just being a plugin that you install, it actually hijacks the core functionality of your Django framework the same way that Mezzanine would do. Um, this is not really my preferred way of doing things. I would rather build something from scratch and then have a plugin that you can use. You may or may not want to use it, and it operates as a separate application. This is what a sale or does, and we're going to be looking at that a little bit later. But just for the purpose of this example, we are going to follow these instructions, bearing in mind that it is going to hijack some of our core settings in Django. So the first part that I want to look at is this section here. We do not have make virtual virtual env installed, so I'm just going to use our usual way of creating a virtual environment. And then I'm just going to go to my terminal, and I've created a directory called Oscar on my desktop. So I want to cd into Oscar. And then I'm going to paste this line of code, which is, as we've done many times before, created a virtual environment for us. So you'll now see once this is done that our virtual environment will be created. The next thing we want to do is activate our virtual environment. And you'll notice before we used the word source and then went to that environment, you can actually just use a dot character here. So this is a nice shorthand for saying source, and this should activate our virtual environment. So we've created it and now we've activated it. Great. And the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create our Django project. So initially when you create a Django project, it won't be a a Oscar project, but what we will do is we will edit our settings file so that it does end up being an Oscar project, and we will import all of the relevant libraries. So the first thing that I want to do when we've just created it and went into our virtual environment is actually install Django Oscar. So let's go back here and then let's just install Django Oscar into our virtual environment. You'll notice that this is quite quick for me because I'm caching it. You probably wouldn't have done this before, so this may take a little bit longer to download everything. What you will notice as well is that I don't know if I'll be able to find it here, but Django itself is actually a dependency of the Django Oscar framework. So it will make sure that you have Django installed. So you don't need to install Django as a separate library over and above this. Here we go, collecting Django. So Django is actually a library that is required. So we don't really need to install Django again. If we go back here again, so now we have Oscar installed. The next thing we want to do is actually go ahead and create our shop. So this is a documentation that was written for an older version of Django, where you would need the Django admin.py. We don't need this .py here. We can just say Django admin start project frub shop, as we have been doing before. So let's give ourselves a bit of space, and I'm just going to take out the Cool, and now we can probably cd into that, and you'll notice that we have a normal Django installation here. So the first thing that I want to do, as if we did have a normal Django installation, is just make all of our default migrations. So actually, let's leave that for now, and because I'm almost certain that Oscar is going to try and create its own data sets as well, so we can do all of our migrations at once. Cool. The next thing we need to do is we need to ensure that Pillow is installed. And Pillow is an image library. So you see a Python imaging library. And this helps us a lot with creating images. As we discussed in one of our previous lectures, all it really does is it allows you to, it gives you access to a new type of model field known as image, where before the default would have just been file field. So this is obviously has some sort of validation that's specific to images. If I'm not mistaken, I think Pillow was installed as one of the dependencies. Here, well, let's just go ahead and install it anyway, and let's see what happens. So pip install Pillow. Requirements already satisfied. Yes. Okay. Awesome. And now what we need to do is we need to pull the whole of our Oscar library into our settings.py file. So we're going to say from oscar.defaults import star, which is everything. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Sublime Text. I've already done that here, and you'll see this is our virtual environment we've just created, and here's our project. I'm going to go into settings.py, and underneath import OS, I'm going to import the defaults from Oscar, and just go ahead and save that. We won't be able to run our site straight away because there's quite a lot of setup that we need to do. Now it says modify your templates to include the main Oscar templates. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole thing and replace our templates section in our settings.py. So templates is down here. Just going to go ahead and replace the whole thing. And don't forget to import this to add this line as well. So from Oscar import Oscar main template directory, and that obviously gives us access to all of Oscar's templates. Let's go back here again. Before Django, the setting was split between. Okay, so we don't actually need this at all. The next thing that we're going to do is modify our installed apps section. So again, this was written for an older version of Django, so this won't all be the same. So we may need to just tweak this a little bit to fit in with our current settings file. If you're using a later version of Django than I am, then you may need to go above and beyond to get this to work properly. So let's go to our installed apps, and I'm going to try and mimic this as best as I can. So obviously the first thing that we need to do is from Oscar imports the core apps that Oscar has. And what's really nice, and I think we did discuss it before, is if you want to append list values to a list, you can just say plus, and then this function obviously just returns a list value. So we're really just adding more items to this list of installed apps. So the only difference here really is that we have the admin installed app here, where we didn't have it on this one, and then we have a few extra installed apps that we need to add. The first is Flat Pages. So what Flat Pages is basically a management tool that allows you to put flat HTML into your database, and then it handles that for you. Flat Pages is probably going to throw us an error, so we need to install this as another package. So let's just go back into our console again and say pip install Flat Pages. Great, and now we're downloading and installing Flat Pages. I'm not sure why it's giving us that issue, but I suspect that it may be a dependency of another app that is already installed. Let's carry on from here, and we'll possibly come back to this. So we've put Flat Pages in. Let's just see. we over here, yes, and then we need to add two other apps, the one called Compressor and the one called Widget Tweaks. Okay, and let's just get our formatting right. And these are all basically matching each other. And then the last thing we need to do is just say site ID is equal to one. I think this is related to when you have a multi-site installation. Cool. One thing that I know for a fact that we are going to have to install is Compressor. And what Compressor does is it is just a special library that handles compressing and caching your inline JavaScript and CSS. So let's go and install the Compressor package. It's not called Compressor in the Django library. It's called Django_compressor. So we'll have to go. We can possibly press up and see what happens. Yes, pip install. And then let's say Django, and then it's underscore compressor. Let's see, yes, okay, cool. So I've already installed this previously, so it's cached it, and it's just adding it to our virtual environment. Again, if you do this, it will take a little bit longer, but my environment is inherently not any different from yours. Cool, so we're happy with that. Next thing we need to do is go back here, make sure that's all the same. Okay, and it says here, note Django contrib flat pages, which isn't included by default flat pages, also requires Django contrib sites. So I think we are probably going to have to use that, Django contrib sites. I don't think we've used it in our, aha, here we go, Django contrib sites. I think we may have to use this before we call flat pages. If not, then let's just do it to be safe. Okay, cool. So installed apps needs to look something like this. Okay, which won't be enabled by default. More info about installing flat pages in the Django docs. So let's go ahead and open that. I think that's probably a good idea. And what does it say here about installing flat pages? Okay, install, added to your installed apps. Perfect. Make sure we've set the site ID. Perfect. Add Django contrib flat pages to your installed apps. Done. And then we need to add this to our URLs. So either do that or add Django add this to our middleware setting. I've got a feeling that this is going to come later on when we add our middleware stuff. So let's just see, and if not, we can come back to this. So let's go into here. Default Django compressor and tweaks is optional. Yeah, so compressor we've already installed, and tweaks, I think, let's see if it throws us any errors. We may have to install that as additional library. And then here we go. We need to install the Django middleware, which is going to hijack our core stuff, and the flat pages middleware, which is also going to hijack our core stuff. So let's copy these two lines of code, go back to our settings.py file, go to our middleware section, and now we need to add these additional lines over here underneath that. So that takes care of our flat pages, hopefully. And then we just need to add a whole lot of kind of like constants or settings that Oscar requires out of the box. So there's some authentication stuff. So we can let's just go to the bottom of our file, underneath there, let's add some space, paste our authentication. Great stuff. We need to go into our URLs file. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace my whole default URLs file with what they've given us. So let's just do that. Replace, let's just save this. Great stuff. Search backend, okay. So we're going to be using basic search here. So again, this is just more configuration stuff. So we just add that to the bottom of our file. I don't want to fiddle with this. This is a special backend search. We're not going to be using that. Database settings, I'm pretty confident that our database is set up and is fine. And then we should just be able to run these two commands here. Now, something that I know is going to, it's not here, is going to give us issues is the setting up of our static and our media paths. So let's just go have a look and actually see if it gives us anything here with regards to it. Maybe we missed it. Here we go. Cool. So we need to ensure the media files are set up correctly. So this means that we need to have these URLs, and we also need to set these are constants. So media URL and static URL, which are constants, and media root and static root. And this is here specifically because we may want to use something like Amazon AWS, Amazon S3 to actually serve our content for us and function as a CDN. So in order to get this whole configuration stuff right, let's just open the sandbox settings that that Oscar says to us. So what I want to do is I want to just copy all of this from here down to the end of static file finders, and we're just going to put that at the bottom of our URLs. The static URL I think is in here as well. Yeah, so we can just replace that. It's exactly the same. And what we are using here is a location which we haven't used before. So we obviously need to import location from somewhere. So let's have a look here, and it's probably going to be one of our imports things that we need. Here we go. This section here is what we're going to need. So we need to import our system, which basically what it is just a whole lot of system libraries that relate to the current hosting that we've got set up. So we can do some things such as like create an actual project directory to get the absolute path of our files, and then use system to help us get our version info and things like that. So let's just import this. I don't even think we need to use system because it looks like version info is on system, but we're not using it at all. We're really just using project directory, and then we're using the project directory here. I don't even know if we're using that. Let's keep it in, and then you'll see that we're creating our location variable using our operating system library that we've imported. So let's just import both of these to be safe. I've got a feeling that we may not even need project directory. Great, so location has now been created. So let us now actually just go ahead and, well, what we'll need to do is run our migrations, and I suppose that'll be the true test as to, let's close this tab, as to whether or not our setup has been successful. So let's run python manage.py migrate, and this should take care of all of our default migrations as well as our new Oscar migrations. So let's see if this works. And oh my goodness, this is actually working. We get a couple of deprecation notices, which I'm not too worried about. But really, it's just migrating all of our stuff, and this is just so awesome to see. Once this is done, what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and actually run the server and see if we have successfully set up Oscar. More deprecation notices, and congratulations guys, we have a successful version of Oscar up and running. So let's go here to our localhost. Yuck. Okay, so what does this error mean? It really doesn't give us much explanation at all. It doesn't really give us anything helpful in terms of line numbers. So I think the best thing to do is to go back to our Django documentation and have a little look here. So what I have noticed, and this is after a little bit of investigation, is that the middleware that's being called, and this is really just sparks from my thinking that when something like this breaks, it's probably a core Django thing that's processing middleware incorrectly. And you'll notice here that the constant that's being defined is called middleware underscore classes. So up until Django 1.10, this was the standard to call, when you create a new project, it would be called middleware classes. But in Django 1.10, this is now changed to just be middleware. So the classes has fallen away and it's become redundant. But obviously, because it's deprecated, middleware classes will still work on Django 1.10. It looks like Oscar is still working on an older version of Django. So hopefully these deprecations will be sorted out soon in terms of this documentation. So let's just go back to our app quickly and see if this is actually what it is. So I want to find the middleware section and change this to say middleware underscore classes. And we can now go ahead and save that. And then it looks like our issue has gone away. Let's refresh. Yes, and you'll now see that we have successfully logged into our storefront, and we can now select our language. We can now browse the store for all products. Obviously, no products have been created, view cart, and there's quite a lot of cool stuff that comes with Oscar out of the box.